February 2022 marked the start of a new phase in a conflict that reshaped global security. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine revived the ghosts of Europe's 20th century wars. But how did it begin, and why does it still rage on?
Ukraine entered the winter of 2013 to 2014, weary of corruption and weak institutions, yet hopeful for change. The symbol of that hope was the EU Association Agreement. Years of talks, a sense that reforms and a European course were almost within reach. On 21st November 2013, the government swerved. The cabinet suspended preparations to sign, citing economic interest and the need to draw closer to Russia. For many, it sounded like a rejection of the European path and of citizens' choice. That evening, the response ignited. People, mostly students and young people, gathered on Kiev's Maidan Nezalezhnosti. No scripts or party orders, Ukrainian and EU flag, handmade signs like "Ukraine is Europe." Social media amplified the impulse. The hashtag Euromaidan became a civic symbol, not a party slogan. The first days were peaceful. Songs, poems, tea, open discussions by the Independence Monument. The authorities seemed to wait it out. But the night of 29th to 30th November became the turning point. Mostly students remained on the square. At 4 a.m., bare-cut riot police arrived. A brutal dispersal. Batons, chases through dark streets. St. Michael's Monastery opened its doors, an act that became a symbol of refuge. Footage of the beatings spread instantly. The country woke up angry. On the 1st of December, hundreds of thousands filled the streets, people of all ages and professions, from Kiev and the region. From then on, the Maidan gained structure and staying power. Tents, a stage, kitchens, clinic, info point. Maidan self-defense volunteers guarded the perimeter and built barricades of tires, blocks, and boards along Kreshchatyk, Institutska, and Hrushevskoho. The city center turned into a self-governed town of resistance. January 2014 brought a new wave. Parliament pushed through dictatorship laws, restricting freedoms, radicalizing the protest. On Hrushevskoho Street, clashes with police intensified. On 22nd January came the first death. Serhiy Nihoyan, a student activist, and Mikhail Zhizneusky, a volunteer in the self-defense units. From then on, people came not only for change, but for justice and memory. Institutska Street became a front line. Snipers appeared on rooftop. The climax came on 18 to 20 February. Shots in the very heart of the city. Dozens of protesters were killed. Names like Ihor Kostenko and Ustim Holodnyuk entered the pantheon of the Heavenly Hundred. In total, about 100 protesters and several law enforcement officers were killed. The authorities lost control, morally and politically. On 21st February, under EU mediation, the government and opposition signed an agreement. Amnesty, constitutional reform, early election, but the moment had passed. That same day, security forces withdrew from the center. Soon the president and his entourage left Kiev. Viktor Yanukovych fled to Russia. On 22nd February, Parliament removed him from office and formed transitional bodies. The victory of Euromaidan was not just a change of name. It was the affirmation of civic dignity and the idea of power as an institution, not a master. The barricades were dismantled, but the experience of self-organization remained. Kitchens and clinics, the stage and headquarters became a school of civil society. The memory of the Heavenly Hundred fixed the price of freedom. Ukraine gained a chance to move toward European reforms and to build new institutions, not as a dream, but as a task. While Kiev was still absorbing the victory of the Revolution of Dignity, another script planned beyond Ukraine was set in motion in the south. February 2014, the new government was only forming. Security institutions were disoriented. At that moment, Russia made its first move to seize Crimea. On the morning of 27th February, armed men without insignia seized the Crimean parliament and cabinet buildings in Simferopol. They acted with discipline and precision, without a shot fired. Armored vehicles appeared, masked soldiers occupied key sites. They became known as the Little Green Men. Moscow initially denied involvement, calling them local self-defense, but it soon became clear they were Russian troops, special forces, Marine, airborne, operating from Russia and the Black Sea Fleet base in Sevastopol. The aim, full control without a formal declaration of war. Within days, they took airports, TV centers, government offices, roads, and command posts. Ukrainian units were surrounded, cut off from communications and supply, pressured to surrender and defect. That same day, 27th February, under the barrels of assault rifle, a new government was appointed with Sergei Aksyonov, an obscure pro-Russian politician, at its head. Votes were taken in a captured building under armed guard. Kyiv declared the events illegal, but lacked the means for an immediate response. The army was unprepared, partners were still assessing the situation, and the country was in a chaotic transition after Yanukovych's flight. On the 16th of March, a so-called referendum was held under occupation without international monitoring or legal basis. The ballot offered no option to remain in Ukraine, only join Russia or return to the 1992 Crimean Constitution. Polling stations were guarded by armed men. Russian soldiers and self-defense units were present. Amid promises of higher pensions, Russian passports, and stability, the authorities announced 96.77% in favor, with 83% turnout. Ukraine and most of the world refused recognition. The UN General Assembly affirmed Ukraine's territorial integrity. On the 18th of March, the Kremlin staged a ceremony to sign the treaty on the accession of Crimea and Sevastopol to the Russian Federation. Putin spoke of restoring historical justice, and a fast-track legal integration began. The ruble was introduced. Businesses, media, and universities were re-registered. Repression followed. Pro-Ukrainian activists disappeared or were arrested. The Crimean Tatars, the peninsula's indigenous people, faced bans on leaders' entry, pressure on the Mejlis, raids, and separatism cases. The operation was executed quickly and with minimal open combat, blending special operations, information warfare, and psychological pressure, a classic hybrid tactic. Kyiv declared Crimea a temporarily occupied territory and launched a diplomatic campaign for support. The US, EU, and others imposed sanctions on Russia, freezing assets, restricting technology and market access, and Russia was expelled from the G8. The sanctions did not reverse the annexation, but created long-term costs and set a dangerous precedent of changing borders by force in Europe. After World War II, almost immediately, Moscow expanded its military footprint. Black Sea Fleet bases grew, Soviet-era airfields were restored, modern air defenses, including S-400, were deployed, submarines and new ships arrived. Crimea became a fortified Russian outpost in the Black Sea, shifting the regional balance. Ukraine lost control of its southern coast, and NATO states on the Black Sea noted an elevated threat. The annexation marked the open phase of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, not an internal crisis, but a planned seizure of a sovereign state's territory at a moment of vulnerability. Yet the shock also consolidated Ukrainian identity. Society chose a course of independence and resistance. From this came a rebuilt army, new diplomacy, and a strengthened will to fight. And though the peninsula fell under Russian control, in Ukrainian consciousness, it remained what it had always been, part of Ukraine. In spring 2014, amid the annexation of Crimea and political turmoil in Kyiv, the Donbas spiraled fast. Armed men without insignia seized government buildings in Donetsk, Luhansk, Sloviansk, and Kramatorsk, proclaimed the DPR/LPR, and prepared unrecognized referendums. 11 May. Kyiv launched the anti-terrorist operation, ATO, but started with strained resources and fragmented security forces. By June-July, the Ukrainian Army, National Guard, and volunteer battalions counterattacked, retaking Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Sievierodonetsk, and Lysychansk, momentarily suggesting the tide might turn. The turning point came in August at Ilovaisk. Early gains gave way to encirclement as fresh, well-equipped forces appeared, what Kyiv and Western allies described as direct Russian intervention, cementing the term hybrid war. A promised green corridor for withdrawal became a deadly ambush. Losses shocked society and altered the war's tone. On July 17, 2014, the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 internationalized the conflict. A Boeing 777 was shot down over Donbas, killing 298 people. International investigators later traced the launch to a Bucha SAM brought from Russia and returned there after the strike. For the EU, the US, and partners, this became a point of no return, triggering tougher sanctions. Donbas was now a war theater with global consequences. A freeze was attempted with Minsk I, 5th of September 2014. Ceasefire, heavy weapons pullback, OSO monitoring, and political dialogue. On the ground, the truce was fragile. Fighting persisted, especially around Donetsk airport, where the Cyborg, a small Ukrainian garrison, held shattered terminals for months, turning infrastructure into a symbol of defiance. By January 2015, the airport was effectively obliterated. That winter, the focus shifted to Debaltseve, a crucial rail junction between Donetsk and Luhansk. Intense fighting, the threat of encirclement, and the involvement of regular Russian units forced an organized Ukrainian withdrawal in February, preserving command and cohesion, but losing positions and equipment. Minsk II followed on 12th February 2015, with a more detailed schedule for weapons pullback, OSCE oversight, and political provisions on elections and amnesty. In practice, implementation was partial. The shooting ebbed, but did not stop. From spring 2015, the front stabilized. The line of contact hardened into a de facto front. Artillery duels, sabotage, and local assault. Ukraine built fortifications and rotation. The army professionalized quickly. Volunteer networks filled critical supply gaps. In the occupied areas, de facto administrations took root. Russian logistics flowed in, the ruble circulated, and local documents appeared, an institutionalized gray zone. The 2014 to 2015 outcome was a shift from maneuver warfare to a protracted positional conflict. Ukrainian society paid a high price, but consolidated. New memorial rituals, songs, films, and volunteer infrastructures emerged. Donbas became both a symbol of resistance and an open wound. Politically, sanctions and the Minsk-Normandy track were entrenched. Strategically, it was a pause before later, far larger phases of the confrontation. In short, a swift insurgency evolved into a hybrid interstate war, punctuated by Ilovaisk, MH17, Debaltseve, II Minsk deal, and then a long, grinding stalemate. After Ilovaisk and Debaltseve, the Eastern Front stabilized. From spring 2015, a 400-plus kilometer line of contact became a de facto border between government-held Ukraine and the occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk. The war turned positional. Trenches, strong points, daily artillery, mortars, and snipers, with only sporadic raids and almost no map changes. For thousands of Ukrainian troops, it was years of rotation, a war without a front, where death came suddenly. Civilians in the gray zone endured shelling, destruction, and constant fear, living in basements, fetching water under fire, schooling with drills to run to shelters. Checkpoints on the line became lifelines. Pensioners traveled for benefits. Families split by the war met across barriers. The contact line became a line of human tragedies. The conflict spilled into cyberspace. In 2015, the BlackEnergy attack cut power in winter. In 2017, NotPetya, starting via Ukrainian accounting software, paralyzed banks, railways, government systems, and global corporations, causing billions in losses. Investigations linked these operations to Russian state-aligned hackers, making Ukraine a testbed for hybrid war. Meanwhile, Moscow tightened control over the occupied areas. From 2019, residents of the so-called DPR-LPR received Russian passports via a fast-track process, politically and legally binding the region to Russia and creating a pretext to protect its citizens. Diplomacy in the Normandy format and the Minsk II package stalled. Kyiv prioritized security and border control. Moscow and its proxies pressed for political concessions and special status. Ceasefires were declared repeatedly and repeatedly broken. Peace on paper, war in reality. Alongside this, Russia wielded the full hybrid toolkit: disinformation through media and social network, election meddling, economic pressure, and energy leverage. Despite this, Ukraine strengthened its statehood, modernizing the army, integrating volunteer units, expanding international cooperation, and sustaining robust volunteer networks. Thus, from 2015 to 2021, the conflict froze. Daily casualties on an unchanging front, hybrid attacks as dangerous as artillery, and the ground quietly laid for the next, much harsher phase. In 2021, tension around Ukraine stopped being background noise and became open preparation for war. Russia steadily massed forces on the border and in Crimea. Exercises, Rotations, trains of armor, stockpiles of fuel and ammunition, everything pointed to a long operation. At the same time came ultimatums to the US and NATO for security guarantees, effectively demanding no further expansion and limits on alliance presence. Propaganda about a genocide of Russian speakers swell. In the occupied areas, staged drills and provocations built a pretext to protect our own. By late winter, Moscow made the legal move. It recognized the DPR/LPR, signed friendship treaty, and sent in peacekeepers, shifting from hybrid methods to overt justification. False flag incidents and evacuations deeper into Russia followed, alongside cyberattacks and disinformation to spread panic. Ukraine, meanwhile, mobilized reserve, trained, strengthened civil defense, and received limited aid from partners. In February 2022, shelling and sabotage spiked, diplomacy hit hard deadlines, and the engineered surprise turned into a full-scale invasion whose speed and scope outstripped even the bleakest forecast. In February 2022, Russia massed forces under the guise of exercises, including Union Resolve 2022 in Belarus. Units did not return to bases and stayed just tens of kilometers from Kiev, clearly a pre-war deployment. On February 22nd, Putin delivered a televised address denying Ukraine's statehood and recognizing the so-called DPR/LPR. Friendship treaties were signed and peacekeepers moved into occupied Donbas. At 5 a.m. on February 24th, the special military operation began. Missile and airstrikes across Ukraine and a three-axis invasion down from Belarus toward Kiev, from the east via Sumy and Kharkiv, and from the south out of Crimea toward Kherson and Mariupol, aimed at a blitzkrieg. Kiev was the main objective. The assault on Hostomel airport failed. Fierce battles in Irpin, Bucha, and Vorzel stalled the advance, with Russian columns ambushed and destroyed. Kharkiv endured heavy bombardment, but did not fall. In the south, Russia advanced faster. Kherson fell on March 2nd. Mariupol came under brutal siege, its maternity hospital and drama theater strikes shocking the world. By mid-March, the situation was critical, yet Ukrainian forces, territorial defense, and civilians blunted the offensive, blowing bridges, mining roads, and striking with javelins and Bayraktars. Late March brought a turning point. Russia pulled back from Kiev and Chernihiv region, an admission the blitzkrieg had failed. After the withdrawal, atrocities against civilians were uncovered in Bucha and nearby towns. Bottom line for February-March, Ukraine held, Kiev stood, Kharkiv endured, Odessa was protected. The cost was immense. Thousands of lives, devastated cities, and the siege of Mariupol. The attempted lightning victory collapsed, and the war became a long, bloody struggle.